The heat was a physical weight on the broken asphalt of the diner's parking lot. It shimmered in waves off the chrome of the single Harley-Davidson parked near the door, a machine that looked as weary and weathered as the man who owned it. Silas Kane sat at a small booth by the window, his back to the room. He was a study in faded glory. His leather vest, or cut, was cracked and worn thin across the shoulders, the dark material bleached to a dusty gray by 1,000 suns. The patches sewn onto it were frayed, their colors muted by years of wind and rain. He nursed a cup of black coffee, its bitterness a familiar anchor in the drifting emptiness of the afternoon. The diner itself, a relic of a bygone highway era, smelled of stale grease, weak coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of despair. The red vinyl on his seat was split, leaking yellowed foam like a wound. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched into a vast, indifferent horizon, the sky a bleached-out, unforgiving blue. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was just passing through, a ghost on a 2-lane blacktop, chasing a memory that grew fainter with every mile. The fragile peace was shattered by the high-pitched, arrogant scream of a European sports car pulling in too fast. It was a machine designed to be noticed, a garish slash of canary yellow against the muted browns of the landscape. It skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust, taking up 3 parking spots directly in front of the diner's entrance, its engine snarling before cutting out with a final, obnoxious pop. The door of the diner swung open, and the world's volume seemed to double. A young man, no older than 20, strode in. He was all sharp angles and expensive fabric, his white polo shirt so pristine it seemed to glow. His hair was a meticulously sculpted mess, and a pair of designer sunglasses were pushed up on his head. He was flanked by a girl whose laughter was as brittle as glass and another young man who mirrored his leader's smug expression. They were loud, entitled, and utterly out of place. The young man's eyes, the color of washed-out denim, swept the room with a look of profound boredom before they landed on Silas. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He nudged his friend. "Check it out, Bryce," he said, his voice carrying easily across the half-empty room. "Looks like the Museum of Natural History is missing one of its exhibits." The girl, Tiffany, giggled. The dismissal was casual, absolute. To them, Silas wasn't a man. He was a prop, a piece of local color to be mocked before they moved on. The trio slid into the booth directly behind Silas, their voices a constant, grating hum. The young man, who introduced himself to the nervous waitress as Chad, began a running commentary, each word a carefully polished barb aimed at the silent figure by the window. "I just don't get it," Chad said, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Why would anyone ride one of those things? It's basically a tractor with 2 wheels. Probably leaks more oil than the Exxon Valdez." Bryce snorted in agreement. "And the outfit. Seriously. Did he skin a couch from the 70s to make that vest?" Tiffany added her own vapid contribution. "It's so dirty. I feel like I need a tetanus shot just from looking at him." The air in the diner grew thick with unspoken tension. An elderly couple in the corner stopped eating, their forks hovering over their plates. The waitress, a young woman named Sarah with tired eyes, fumbled with her notepad, her gaze darting between Chad's table and Silas's rigid back. The cook, a large, sweaty man named Hank who also owned the place, peered through the service window, his brow furrowed. Yet no one spoke up. They were bystanders, trapped in the orbit of Chad's casual cruelty, their silence a form of passive consent. Silas didn't move. He continued to stare out the window, his big, calloused hand wrapped around his coffee mug. He gave no indication that he had even heard them. To Chad, this silence was not a sign of strength, but of weakness. It was an invitation to escalate, to poke the bear until it whimpered. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Hey, Grandpa," he called out. "Lost your way to the nursing home? Maybe we should call you a cab. A real one, with a roof and everything." The humiliation was now direct, a spotlight shining on Silas, pinning him against the cracked vinyl of the booth. Inside Silas's mind, the noise of the diner faded into a distant buzz. The bitter coffee on his tongue was a portal to another time. It tasted like the brew Eleanor used to make on their camping trips in the Sierras, served in tin mugs as the sun rose over the pines. Her laughter the only warmth he ever truly needed. He could almost feel the cold morning air, see the wisp of her breath as she told him a story. That was before the sickness had stolen her voice, then her light, leaving him in a world that had lost its color. The diner's stale air was replaced by the metallic tang of cordite and diesel fumes from a lifetime ago. He was 22 again, huddled in a ditch somewhere far from home, sharing a canteen of lukewarm, gritty coffee with boys who would never grow old. They had given him his road name, Shepherd, because he always had a way of guiding the lost ones back, of finding a path through the chaos. He had carried their memories for 40 years, their faces etched into his soul more permanently than any tattoo. He ran a thumb over a small, circular patch on his vest, the one Bryce had mocked. It was a simple design, a stylized raven in mid-flight. It had been given to him by his road brother, Deacon, a man whose laughter was as loud as his motorcycle's engine. Deacon had pressed it into his hand just hours before a logging truck had crossed the center line on a winding mountain pass. "For watching my back, Shepherd," he'd said. This vest wasn't leather and thread. It was a mosaic of promises kept, of loyalties honored, of ghosts he refused to leave behind. Chad's words were nothing. They were pebbles thrown against a fortress wall, a child's tantrum in the face of a mountain's stoic silence. He had weathered real storms, stood in the face of true destruction. This was just weather. Chad's frustration grew with every moment Silas refused to engage. He craved a reaction, a flash of anger, a tremor of fear, anything to validate his sense of superiority. When silence was his only reply, his casual cruelty curdled into something more malicious. He stood up, feigning a stretch. "Well, this place is a dump," he announced. "Let's blow this pop stand." As he turned, he swung his arm out wide, as if by accident, his hand connecting squarely with Silas's coffee mug. The cheap ceramic cup flew from the table, shattering on the linoleum floor. Hot, brown liquid splashed across Silas's worn denim jeans and pooled around his boots. For a moment, the diner was utterly silent, the only sound the dripping of coffee from the edge of the table. Chad looked down with a theatrical gasp of surprise. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry," he said, his voice oozing insincere regret. He looked at Silas, a smirk playing on his lips. "Clumsy me. Look what I did to your pants." He pulled a wad of cash from his pocket, peeling off a $1 bill and letting it flutter to the floor near the puddle. "Here, that should cover the damages. Go buy yourself a new cup, on me." The insult was profound, a public emasculation designed to strip away the last vestiges of Silas's dignity. The pressure in the room became unbearable. The family in the corner booth, a man and a woman with their young daughter, stared with wide, horrified eyes. Sarah, the waitress, stood frozen by the counter, her face pale. Hank, the owner, who should have been the one to restore order, simply turned his back and began polishing an already gleaming glass, his reflection in the mirror showing a man defeated by his own cowardice. No one moved. No one spoke. In that moment, Silas was completely and utterly alone. An old man in coffee-stained jeans, standing in a puddle of public humiliation while the world looked away. He slowly, deliberately, rose to his feet. As Silas stood, a small drama unfolded in the corner of the diner, a tiny tragedy that would alter the course of the afternoon. The little girl from the family booth, who had been watching the confrontation with a child's unfiltered curiosity, was startled by the sound of the shattering mug. Her hand, clutching a cone of bright pink strawberry ice cream, jerked in surprise. The precarious scoop, already melting in the diner's stuffy heat, tumbled from its perch. It landed on the floor with a wet, pathetic splat, a vibrant pink starburst on the grimy checkerboard tile. The girl's face, which had been a mask of fascination, crumpled into despair. A heartbreaking sob tore from her small chest. Her mother quickly shushed her, mortified by the added attention. "Hush, honey, it's okay," she whispered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. At Chad's table, Bryce and Tiffany erupted in cruel laughter, pointing at the crying child as if she were part of the entertainment. "Guess it's just not his day," Bryce sneered, gesturing from Silas to the girl. Misery loves company, but Silas paid them no mind. He ignored the stinging heat of the coffee soaking into his leg. He ignored the dollar bill lying at his feet like a final insult. His gaze was fixed on the crying child. He walked past Chad's table, his movements steady and unhurried. He stopped at the counter where Sarah stood, still stunned into inaction. From the back pocket of his jeans, he pulled a worn leather wallet, held together by little more than memory and a thick rubber band. He opened it, revealing a nearly empty interior. With thick, careful fingers, he extracted 2 crumpled $1 bills and a handful of change. It was, to anyone who was truly watching, likely the last of his money. He placed it carefully on the counter. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. "A scoop of strawberry," he said, nodding towards the little girl. For the lady, he didn't wait for a response or a thank you. He simply performed the small, selfless act, a quiet rebellion of kindness in a room thick with malice. Then, he turned and walked toward the door, his dignity intact, leaving the currency of his character on the counter behind him. The change in the diner's atmosphere was as sudden and palpable as a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. The sound of Silas's voice, calm and deep, had cut through the tension, and his simple act of generosity had redrawn the moral lines in the room. Chad's sneering laughter died in his throat, replaced by a look of baffled indignation. He couldn't comprehend an action that wasn't transactional or self-serving. The father of the little girl, a man in a simple plaid shirt, stood up from his booth. He looked from the money on the counter to Silas's retreating back, his face a mixture of gratitude and shame for his own inaction. "Sir," he called out, his voice thick with emotion. "Wait, let me pay for that," but Silas was already pushing the glass door open, stepping out into the blinding sunlight, not even glancing back. The whispers started then, rippling through the small crowd of onlookers. "Did you see that?" An old woman murmured to her husband. "He spent his last dollar on that little girl's ice cream. That rich punk." Another man muttered, glaring at Chad with open hostility. "Someone ought to teach him some manners." Sarah, the waitress, looked down at the crumpled bills on the counter as if they were sacred artifacts. Her eyes, previously filled with fear, now held a glimmer of admiration. She scooped a generous portion of strawberry ice cream into a fresh cone and carried it over to the little girl, offering her a warm, genuine smile. Hank, the owner, finally turned from the bar, the pretense of busyness falling away. He saw the scene with new eyes, the spilled coffee, the righteous anger on his customers' faces, and the quiet nobility of the man who had just walked out. A deep, burning shame settled in his gut. He had stood by and done nothing. He had judged the man by his worn-out vest and not by the content of his heart. The silence that had once been complicity now became a shared, collective judgment, and its target was no longer the old biker, but the arrogant boy with the fat wallet and the empty soul. Just as the diner door was swinging shut behind Silas, a new sound intruded upon the desert's oppressive silence. It began as a faint, low-frequency hum, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. It was a sound that made the coffee in the remaining mugs tremble, creating tiny ripples on their dark surfaces. Chad, poised to deliver a parting shot to Silas's back, froze mid-insult, his head cocked. Everyone in the diner turned their heads toward the highway, which shimmered like a river of mercury under the afternoon sun. The hum grew steadily, resolving itself into the deep, syncopated rhythm of V-twin engines. It was the sound of approaching thunder on a cloudless day. A single pinprick of light appeared on the crest of a distant hill. It was joined by another and another, until the horizon was filled with a constellation of headlights. The sound swelled from a roar to a physical force that rattled the diner's plate glass windows in their frames. It was not a small group of riders. It was a procession, an army on wheels. In tight, disciplined formation, A wave of chrome and steel poured over the hill and descended toward the diner. 50 motorcycles, maybe more, a rolling tide of Hell's Angels. They moved as one organism, their powerful engines creating a deafening symphony of mechanical fury. They slowed as they approached the diner, their exhaust pipes popping and snarling, and began to file into the cracked parking lot. With practiced precision, they formed a semicircle, their bikes flanking Silas's lone, weathered Harley, creating an imposing fortress of metal and leather. The air, already hot, became thick with the smells of exhaust, hot engine oil, and worn leather. The sheer, overwhelming presence of so many powerful men and machines was breathtaking and terrifying. They had arrived not as random travelers, but as a force summoned. The bikers dismounted in near-perfect unison, their heavy boots hitting the gravel with a single, unified crunch. Each man was a mountain of denim and leather, their cuts adorned with the iconic Death's Head patch of the Hell's Angels. They moved with an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that spoke of immense power held in reserve. The man who strode to the front was built like a blacksmith's anvil, with a chest as broad as the diner's door and arms thick with muscle and faded tattoos. His long, graying beard was woven with small silver rings that glinted in the sun. His eyes, set deep in a weathered face, were like chips of flint, missing nothing. This was the man they called Anvil, the president of the charter. He walked with an unhurried, deliberate gait directly toward the front of the diner. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in the gawking faces pressed against the glass, Chad's absurdly yellow car parked at a jaunty, arrogant angle, and finally, Silas, who stood calmly beside his motorcycle, watching their arrival without surprise. Anvil ignored everyone else. He stopped a few feet from Silas, his expression unreadable. His eyes dropped for a moment to the dark, damp stain of spilled coffee on Silas's jeans, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. Then he looked up, his gaze fixing on Chad, who was standing paralyzed by the door, his face drained of all color. Anvil's voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it had a gravelly resonance that seemed to make the air vibrate. "Problem, Shepard?" he asked, the name hanging in the air with a weight that Chad and the others could not yet comprehend. Anvil took a step closer to the diner, his focus now entirely on the terrified young man. "You see this man?" he said, his voice dropping to a menacingly low growl. He gestured with a thumb toward Silas. "You see this patch on his vest?" He pointed to the faded, frayed patch depicting a raven. "That's not some decoration he bought at a truck stop. That's the Savior's Cross. He was the first to wear it. He got it for running into a burning pile of steel on Interstate 80 to pull 3 of our men out of a wreck. My men, my blood brothers." While everyone else was filming it on their phones, he ran toward the fire. He took another step, his shadow falling over Chad. "The man you've been amusing yourself with, the man you call Grandpa, is Silas Kane. We call him Shepard. He didn't just join this charter. He founded it. He wrote the bylaws we live and die by. Every single man you see here today is here because of him. He's not just a member. He's our first." The weight of Anvil's words settled over the parking lot, silencing even the whisper of the desert wind. Shepard. First. The titles meant nothing to Chad, but the reverence with which Anvil spoke them was unmistakable and terrifying. The truth of the situation crashed down on him, a humiliating, horrifying realization. He had not been punching down at a nameless, homeless old man. He had been mocking a king in his own court, surrounded by a legion of loyal knights he hadn't been able to see. Chad's face was a mask of chalky white fear. Tiffany and Bryce, sensing the catastrophic shift in power, were already backing away slowly, fumbling for the doors of the yellow sports car as if it were a life raft. Inside the diner, the onlookers stared, their mouths agape. The story of the rescue on the interstate painted a picture so profoundly different from the man they had allowed to be humiliated just moments before. The father who had offered to pay for the ice cream now understood he was in the presence of a genuine hero. Anvil didn't lay a hand on Chad. He didn't have to. The sheer force of his disappointment was a heavier blow than any fist. He turned his back on the boy, A silent, complete dismissal. He gave a short, sharp nod to two of his men. They didn't swagger or threaten. They walked to a saddlebag, produced a bottle of chrome polish and several soft, clean rags, and knelt before Silas's Harley. With the quiet reverence of acolytes tending a sacred altar, they began to meticulously clean the old bike, wiping away every speck of road dust, every trace of the spilled coffee. Another biker approached Silas, holding out a neatly folded, clean black t-shirt bearing the club's insignia. Anvil reached up to his own vest, unpinning a small, intricately carved silver eagle, a pin worn only by a charter president, a mark of ultimate respect and authority. He stepped forward and carefully, gently, fastened it onto Silas's vest, just above the faded Savior's cross. "From the chapter, Shepherd," Anvil said, his voice now quiet, meant only for Silas. "For reminding us what honor looks like." At that moment, Hank, the diner owner, burst through the doors, wiping his sweaty palms on his apron, his face a mess of panic and regret. "Sir, Mr. Kane, sir," he stammered, rushing towards Silas. I am so sorry. Your meal, anything you want, it's on the house. For life. For you and all your friends." He gestured wildly at the 50 silent, watching bikers, his apology as much a plea for his own safety as an act of contrition. Silas did not revel in the reversal of fortune. There was no gloating smirk, no triumphant speech. He absorbed the sudden outpouring of respect with the same stoic grace with which he had absorbed the earlier humiliation. He looked at the trembling diner owner and gave a single, slow nod. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement, an acceptance of the gesture. He took the clean shirt and pulled it on over his head, the fresh cotton a small comfort. He walked over to his motorcycle, now gleaming under the relentless sun as if it were brand new. He placed a hand on the shoulder of each of the two men who were still polishing the chrome, a silent expression of gratitude that was clearly understood. Then he turned and looked back at the diner one last time. His eyes found the small family in the corner booth. The little girl was now smiling, her face happily smeared with pink ice cream. Silas's gaze met the father's, and he offered another slight nod, a shared understanding passing between two men who valued decency. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips, a brief flicker of warmth in his weathered face. The spectacle of Chad's departure was a footnote. He and his friends had scrambled into their garish car and sped off, the sound of the high-revving engine a pathetic, whining squeal that was quickly swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Their exit was as undignified as their presence had been. Silas swung a leg over the saddle of his Harley. The engine turned over with a familiar, comforting cough before settling into a deep, powerful rumble. He was home. Anvil mounted his own bike, his expression grim and satisfied. A silent signal, a mere flick of the wrist, passed through the assembled brotherhood. In a deafening, rolling cascade of sound, 50 engines roared to life. The ground itself seemed to tremble with the contained power. But they didn't tear out of the parking lot in a chaotic spray of gravel. They moved with the discipline of a cavalry unit, falling into a perfect two-column formation behind and around Silas. He was at the point, the tip of the spear. They pulled onto the two-lane highway, a rolling procession of honor, escorting their founder, their hero, their shepherd, toward the setting sun. The last thing the people at the diner saw was the back of Silas's vest, the old, faded patches telling stories of a long life lived with purpose, and the new, gleaming silver pin that shone like a star against the dark leather. The thunder of their departure faded slowly, leaving behind a profound silence, a silence filled not with fear or judgment, but with the lingering, transformative power of earned respect.